This video is about the major minerals. The first one we'll talk about is sodium. So the functions of sodium are important in the human body. Sodium helps to regulate fluid balance. It's involved in muscle contraction and nerve transmission. Now for this class, you definitely do not need to know the process of how sodium and potassium are working, but I wanted to at least show you, for some of you who might like to see a visual. Essentially what's happening is we have a cell membrane and we're having exchanges of sodium and potassium across the cell membrane in specific ways that then leads to muscle contraction, nerve transmission, and helping to work towards maintaining fluid balance between outside and inside cells. So looking at this slide, I'm giving you two different diets, and I want you to think about whether diet A or diet B is higher in sodium. So you see diet A has some grapefruit juice, Pop-Tart, baby carrots, cottage cheese, apple, a salad with ranch dressing, croutons, and a diet soda, whereas diet B has granola bars, a quarter-pounder hamburger with cheese, corn chips, fountain drink, ramen noodles, tuna fish bagel, and banana split. So thinking about these, which of these two diets would you guess has higher sodium? And the answer is diet B. So thinking about that, what generalizations can you make about foods high in sodium? Now some of you may know this answer even before taking this class. When we think about foods high in sodium, sodium really can come in our food supply in different areas. So this is from your book showing you sodium in food. And you can see that the majority of sodium is added during food processing or in restaurant meals. The littlest actually is added during cooking at home. However, you could be at home adding it at the table at a restaurant. And then there is some sodium that's naturally present. But the take-home message here is that when we process foods, we often create a situation where the food is now higher in sodium. So generalization is thinking about highly processed foods. One of the concerns we have about sodium is its relationship with hypertension or high blood pressure. So in your book, there's a whole section that talks about this, and you'll have a chance to also practice this as well. When we think about blood pressure, we can measure both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So essentially what we're doing is we're measuring the heart pumping out of blood and what that force is. And when you get a blood pressure taken, essentially that cuff is cutting off the blood flow, and then slowly as it due to the pressure that's there, slowly as that pressure is released, blood flow will continue to go through. And the person taking the blood pressure is listening to when they first hear a heartbeat. Usually they take it in your elbow, they'd be listening there, and I should say the crook of your arm. And then they listen to when the sound dissipates or goes, essentially it is not as loud, gets quieter. And so that first number, when you hear that real loud beat, is going to be the systolic blood pressure, and then the diastolic is when it levels out. So when we think about that, what we want to have our normal range of blood pressure should be less than 120 over less than 80. Anytime it goes out of those two ranges, whether it's higher than 120 on systolic or it's higher than 80 in diastolic, that is considered to be either prehypertension or hypertension. So only one of those numbers has to be out of that range in order to be considered hypertension. So you could have someone who has a blood pressure of 145 over, say, 79, and they still have blood pressure even though the diastolic is below 80. The systolic is above this threshold, therefore they have hypertension. In your book, there's some great figures that talk about how, move my picture over here, and showing you the advice for decreasing risk of high blood pressure could decrease risk, but also thinking about treatment. So it can actually lower blood pressure as well. And you can see that depending on what a person does, it may have a really dramatic effect on their blood pressure. So if a person has a higher BMI, then losing weight may be a benefit. For everyone, adopting a DASH eating plan really is a huge benefit, and it follows my plate and thinking about the Mediterranean diet as well, which is part of dietary guidelines. You can see over here, the DASH diet really is high in whole grains, fruits and vegetables, and it has low-fat dairy and lean meats, which goes right along with thinking about the dietary guidelines and my plate. Exercise daily, that's important for fitness and also helps to treat and prevent hypertension. Limiting sodium, this really is important, especially for someone who has a high risk of getting hypertension, so they have a family history of hypertension. And in that case, limiting sodium could have a dramatic effect. And if someone has hypertension, we're going to want to encourage them to limit sodium to decrease blood pressure. And then limiting alcohol is important, or if people don't drink, not to start drinking. Our next mineral here is potassium. So potassium, if you might remember, really works hand in hand with sodium. So where sodium was involved, potassium is involved as well. And one thing I would say is one thing that we think of with potassium is helping to maintain heartbeat. So that is another function that potassium has. So thinking about potassium, which of these foods is not a rich source of potassium? And the answer is C. The hot dog with the bun is not a rich source of potassium, but fish, baked potato, and dried apricots are. So in this case, similar to question as we had in sodium, what generalizations can you make about foods high in potassium based on what the last slide showed? Hopefully the one thing you see in common with those foods on the last slide that are high in potassium are that they're whole foods. So whole foods have high amounts of potassium in them. Now, what I would say is that you can have these in different varieties too. They don't just have to be fresh. But again, eating whole foods is going to give you good amounts of potassium. Calcium. Calcium, you may already know, even before this class, that calcium is important for bones and teeth. And when we talked about vitamin D, we also mentioned calcium because vitamin D helps to regulate calcium absorption. So it's also, calcium is what's going to be the mineral that's going to be deposited into bones and teeth and can create some rigidity or hardness to the bone tissue. We'll come back to teeth as well in the trace minerals, as fluoride is a trace mineral that's also important for teeth and bones. So what happens is calcium is going to combine with phosphorus and the protein collagen. So thinking back, ask yourself if you remember which vitamin is involved in collagen synthesis or making collagen so that it acts in the way that it should. Hopefully you think of vitamin C. Calcium really can be considered the bank to be able to meet blood calcium needs. So we talked about vitamin D is involved in this as well. So regulating blood calcium levels. But essentially that calcium is often, that's going to be maintaining blood calcium levels. Part of that is going to be coming from bones. So mobilizing calcium out of the bones into the blood to help maintain those levels. Calcium also has some other really critical functions in the body, but not a lot of our calcium is used for these, but they are so essential to maintain healthy bodies. So neurotransmission, involved with blood pressure, blood clotting, and muscle contraction. Which food, when consumed, results in the highest calcium absorption rate? So be careful here thinking about what would be the highest calcium absorption rate. So milk, almond, spinach, or broccoli. And the answer actually is broccoli. So you might wonder, well, why do we always focus so much on milk if broccoli is so much higher in calcium? Well, part of it is on the next slide I'm going to show you. I should say 2 slides ahead, I'm going to show you. One thing I wanted to mention here, to also show you even back here, that all of these actually contain calcium. And you can see from your book, it's showing you, so for instance, a cup of spinach has 245 milligrams of calcium. And let's see, I think we have almonds on here. So 1 ounce of almonds have 76 milligrams of calcium. When you look at fat-free milk, 1 cup, and this would really be similar across all types of fat milk, it's about 300 milligrams. Let's see, and we also had, I think, let's see if they have broccoli. Here's broccoli. So broccoli has 62 milligrams per cup. So now let's take this one step further. So again, here's some of the values for calcium. Some of these are estimates here, and depending on maybe which source you're looking at for the nutrient intake, what type of brand or things like that. But most are going to be around here. So you can see that for different portions, you can see how many milligrams of calcium they have, and then the percent absorbed. So what that's meaning is what you consume in the food, how much of that is actually getting absorbed in the small intestine that's then able to be used in the body. That's what we mean by bioavailability. What you can see is if we do a comparison of how many cups you would, or ounces you would need to consume, how many ounces you would need or cups you need to consume to get the same amount of calcium that you would get in 1 cup of milk, it varies. So for instance, when we think about broccoli, even if it has 61% of the calcium absorbed, how much is actually in it per half a cup serving is quite small. So you'd have to consume 4.5 of these types of serving sizes in order to get the same amount of calcium you get in 1 cup of milk. When it comes to spinach, you can see it actually has quite a large number per unit, per half a cup, but the amount that absorbed is really small because some of that calcium is bound to other things and we can't absorb it. So you'd have to consume a lot more to get the same amount of calcium as you would out of 1 cup of milk. Now when we come to fortified juices, what you can see is they're really trying to fortify it at a level that's very similar to what you would find in a cup of milk. And just as a note, so when we look at the recommendations on the DRI, they put it at a level at which they know that you're not going to be absorbing all of that calcium that's listed there, but they take that into account so that it can still meet 97-98% of the population's needs. So my next question, if a person's calcium intake is deficient, what will happen? A, the person will gain weight. B, calcium absorption in the small intestine will decrease. C, blood calcium will decrease in order to keep bone density as high as possible. Or D, blood calcium will stay the same because calcium withdrawn from the bones. And the correct answer is D. So if we don't get enough calcium in the diet, it is going to take it from our bones to maintain blood calcium levels. You can imagine after time, if you are not getting enough calcium in your diet and it's mobilizing calcium from the bones, your bone structure can change. And in fact, that's what we do see or can see with individuals who end up having osteoporosis. So here you can see a bone, and when we look at trabecular bone, we can see that it is interlinked and it can show strength as well. When we have someone who has osteoporosis, you can see that in some cases there are breakages here, and overall the bone structure is just not as strong because we're losing some of those minerals. What I want to show you now, or have you look at now, is this figure from your book. What it's trying to show you is that you can see that there could be 2 different women, and they achieved a different amount of bone mass in their younger years. So we know that there is a point at which we reach a peak bone mass, and after that we start naturally losing bone as part of aging. If we can try to maximize how much bone we build in our youth, we can help to minimize our risk for osteoporosis later in life. So this is showing you 2 women. So woman A has developed a high peak bone mass at age 30. Her bone loss was slow and steady between ages 30 to 50, and then after 50, because of menopause, it started going down. And this person B had a lower peak bone mass early on and had the same shape of bone loss, but because this woman did not gain as much bone, didn't have as much bone mineral density early on in the years before hitting that peak bone mass age, the level at which they lost bone put them in an osteoporosis range. So the idea is that we want to try to, we often will talk about osteoporosis being a pediatric disease because it's so important to get calcium before that age, around 30, to maximize our peak bone mass. And even as we age, especially for females, as we have hormones change, our estrogen levels go down with menopause, we will still remain in a range of bone density that is higher than osteoporosis. So you may wonder, why is menopause related to bone loss? Well, we know that estrogen is important in helping to maintain bone. So with menopause, we see changes in estrogen levels that then lead to increased bone loss. So this is just a natural phenomenon. What this is showing you here is just showing you that osteoporotic bone is not as strong, and it can lead to, this is showing you crushed lower vertebrae, which then can lead to shrinkage of stature or height. What about calcium supplements? There may be people who are lactose intolerant. You know, ideally we want them to get alternative sources where they're fortified. Calcium is fortified into the food, so they get the benefits of the food as well as the calcium. So there's my first point. You can have a toxicity of calcium, so if you do take supplements, it's important that you don't overtake the supplements. So most supplements are going to be about 500 milligrams, and so I would encourage you to look at your age and using your gender, look at the DRI table to see what your recommendation is for calcium. And then when you do your dietary analysis assignment, you're going to be able to see how your calcium intake is doing. And if you are low, consider maybe adding some more foods that are fortified with calcium. If that doesn't seem like a viable option and you want to do a supplement, you could consider doing a multivitamin mineral supplement. Or if you want to choose something like calcium chew, again, those are about 500 milligrams. So you'd want to balance that with how much you're getting in your diet. And then look at the UL table and see where that's at, and then think about how much you're getting and not go over the UL. So what are the consequences with calcium toxicity? Constipation, you can impede absorption of other minerals like iron, can lead to kidney stones. So the UL is 2,500 milligrams a day. And again, that is a level where you want to not consistently consume above that level between all the sources of calcium you might be getting. Magnesium. Magnesium is really pervasive in the human body, and it's involved in over 300 different enzyme systems, and is like I said, important for many reactions in the body. It's also involved in muscle contraction, but it's actually involved in the opposite, so letting it so that the muscle is essentially in a non-contracted or relaxed state. So which of these foods is not a rich source of magnesium? And the answer is D, cheddar cheese. So these other food sources are all ones that you can get magnesium in it. And some of you might be excited to hear that dark chocolate is one of those. Now you have to remember that it also has calories, so you have to balance that with your overall diet. But there are some health benefits to dark chocolate, including magnesium. And that's all for the major minerals. If you have further questions about any of these, I would encourage you to email me or email the TAs.